There are places the government doesn't want you to see, locations shrouded in secrecy, where rumors of aliens and advanced technology mingle with chilling accounts from witnesses who swear they've seen the impossible. Today, I bring you 3 real stories of people who got too close to the truth. Stories that will make you think twice before approaching Area 51. My cousin Mark was never one to believe in conspiracy theories. To him, the mysteries circulating online were just exaggerated tales created by bored people seeking thrills. He always said the real world was strange enough without needing aliens or secret government projects. Mark worked as a contracted security guard at a military facility in Nevada, not far from the legendary Area 51. For years, he patrolled the perimeter, ensuring that unsuspecting tourists and conspiracy theorists didn't cross the forbidden boundaries. He had seen it all: drunk teenagers defying the use of force authorized signs, lost hunters, and even curious onlookers trying to hide in the desert to observe the base. But nothing prepared him for what happened that night. It was a routine shift, a quiet and bitingly cold night like any other. The desert has a peculiar way of making you feel small, enveloped in darkness and cold, with only the howling wind for company. Mark drove slowly along the perimeter fence, the headlights illuminating the dust kicked up by the tires. Then, something caught his attention: a figure standing near the security fence. His heart raced. This was unusual, to say the least. Anyone who got that close would have triggered motion sensors and possibly surveillance drones, but there were no alarms, no warning signs. He stopped the car and grabbed his flashlight. Protocol demanded caution, but he didn't feel the need to draw his weapon. Approaching slowly, he shone the light toward the stranger. "Hey, this is a restricted area. Step away immediately." Silence. The beam of light revealed a face, and Mark felt a chill run down his spine. The man was completely still, staring at the fence as if he hadn't even noticed the guard's presence. But there was something deeply wrong with him. His skin looked off. It glowed unnaturally under the light, as if made of wax or some synthetic material. His eyes were hollow and empty, reflecting the flashlight in a peculiar way, almost like an animal's at night. His lips were pursed, forming an expression that made no sense, as if he were trying to mimic a human but didn't quite know how. "Sir, leave now," Mark insisted, trying to keep his voice steady. Nothing. No blink, no movement. He took a few more steps, and then, without warning, the figure jerked its head toward him. The movement was too fast, unnatural. Mark held his breath. This didn't seem human. It was an imitation, but a flawed one. The details were wrong, the proportions of the face didn't make sense, and the texture of the skin seemed to adjust to the flashlight's beam, as if it were some kind of defective camouflage. His instincts screamed at him to run. Reaching for his radio, Mark managed to mutter, "I've got an intruder at the east fence. Looks weird." That's when it happened. A deep, vibrating sound filled the air, something he had never heard before. It wasn't a normal noise. It was an electronic hum, low and deep, spreading through his body like a wave, making his chest vibrate and his vision blur. A cold sensation crept up his spine, and a sudden dizziness made his knees buckle. He blinked, trying to steady himself, and when he opened his eyes again, the man was gone. The desert was empty, no footprints in the sand, no sign that anyone had been there. Mark swept the area with the flashlight, his heart pounding. His radio crackled, and a cold, authoritative voice echoed from the other end. "Return to your post immediately. Forget what you saw." His blood ran cold. Forget what he saw. They already knew. When he returned to the base, a superior called him for a private conversation. The man was tall, wore an impeccable uniform, and had a calculating, impassive gaze. He didn't ask what Mark had seen. He didn't ask for explanations. He simply said, with unsettling calm, "You saw one of our visitors. Never speak of this again." Mark resigned the following month, but something changed in him after that night. He never slept soundly again. Sometimes he felt like he was being watched, especially when he looked out the window and saw a motionless silhouette across the street. Silent calls from unknown numbers became frequent, and one early morning, while stepping out for a smoke, he found strange footprints in the sand around his house. Footprints that ended abruptly, as if the thing had vanished into thin air. It all started with a trucker named Dave, a man of few words but with unmatched experience in the vast Nevada desert. He wasn't the type to be easily shaken. With years of road behind him, he knew the ins and outs of the long desert routes and empty highways like the back of his hand. The desert was his second home, and he felt like nothing could faze him. The nighttime hours seemed like a natural extension of his journey, always solitary, always silent. He was on one of those late-night drives, navigating an isolated road near the enigmatic Area 51, which many claimed was the center of inexplicable mysteries. The desert, as always, exuded a suffocating heat, even at that late hour, and the road ahead seemed endless, like a faint line disappearing into the darkness, swallowed by the void of the desert that seemed to embrace everything around it. The moon, which usually shone brightly in the night sky, was hidden behind thin layers of clouds, casting a faint, dim light that made the scene even more desolate. It was a night like any other, or so it seemed. Dave knew that on any other night, he would have focused solely on the road, the steady rhythm of the engine, and the monotony of his route. But that night, something felt off. Something inexplicable in the air made his chest tighten with a growing sense that he was no longer alone, as if an invisible presence, a force of another nature, was watching him, waiting, perhaps even interfering with his journey. The desert was no longer just an empty place. Something was lurking in the shadows, something that couldn't be explained, and the feeling that he was no longer in control of his own trip grew with every mile. That's when, on the horizon, a figure appeared. At first, Dave thought it was a mirage, an illusion caused by loneliness and the fatigue that always accompanied his long, endless trips. Mirages were a constant companion on hot desert nights, but as the silhouette approached, something inside him made him question the reality of what he was seeing. It was a man standing in the middle of the road at the edge of the vast desert, in a spot so isolated that no logical explanation could justify his presence there. There were no lights, no signs of any civilization nearby, nothing. Just the desert and the endless road, and that man standing there like a statue without any movement. He seemed to be there for a purpose Dave couldn't understand. Dave's instincts immediately warned him. No one should be there. Not at that hour, not in that place. The solitude of the desert seemed even deeper, more oppressive, as if the environment itself was closing in around him. But what really made Dave slow down the truck was the man's gaze. It wasn't an ordinary gaze. The man's eyes were fixed on Dave, intense, penetrating, but at the same time, empty. There were no emotions there, no surprise, no fear. It was as if he knew exactly where Dave was and what he was doing, without the need for any words. The gaze was deep, relentless, as if he were waiting for something, or worse, already knew what would happen next. There was no plea for help, no sign that the man needed anything. He was just watching. And that fixed gaze, without any movement, without any emotion, made Dave's blood freeze for a brief moment. Something was terribly wrong, something that transcended human logic. With his heart racing and a growing fear spreading through his body, Dave felt a strange, almost irresistible need to stop. It was as if the environment around him was forcing him to slow down and roll down the truck window, as if there was an invisible connection between him and the man. He tried to ignore it, tried to look away, but he couldn't. As if hypnotized, he opened the window and, in a voice that tried to sound firm but betrayed a hint of insecurity, asked, "Do you need help?" The man didn't move, not a single spark of emotion, not a sign of acknowledgement. He just tilted his head slowly, as if processing the question, as if pondering whether it was worth answering. Then, the man's voice, monotone and without inflection, sounded, and the words made no sense to Dave. "I need to go back." Go back? To where? Dave's thoughts were interrupted by a strange sensation, an incomprehensible impulse that forced him to do something he hadn't planned. Without understanding how, he unlocked the truck door, and before he could reflect further on what he was doing, the man entered without a word. He sat in the passenger seat, without making any movement, without any sound. Dave's discomfort grew exponentially. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating, and he tried to break it, tried to make conversation, but the man's responses were always short, monosyllabic, metallic and completely devoid of emotion. When the man spoke, his voice was like a distant echo, without any human tone, as if he were imitating a conversation but without any soul behind it. The most disturbing thing of all was the fact that the man didn't blink. His eyes remained fixed and open, staring into the void ahead, as if in a state of constant vigilance. It was as if he were incapable of disconnecting from reality, even for a second. With terror beginning to seep into his bones, Dave, in a moment of desperation, looked in the rearview mirror. When his eyes met the reflection of the man, the shock was so great that he almost lost control of the wheel. The man wasn't reflected. There was no image of him in the mirror. The seat was empty. Dave looked again, more carefully, as if trying to deceive his own eyes. But there was no mistake. The seat was empty, but the man was still there, motionless beside him. The silence between them was even heavier now, and Dave felt as if the air around him had become denser, heavier. Panic began to rise, and a sense that something extremely sinister was about to happen overwhelmed him. Suddenly, a blue light cut through the sky, illuminating the desert with a supernatural intensity. It was as if the universe itself had distorted. The truck shook violently, and Dave almost lost control, the sensation of chaos enveloping him completely. The blue light, almost electric, was followed by a muffled sound, as if something massive had collided with the air. It was then that Dave looked to the side again, and the man had disappeared. The seat was empty, and the silence, once again, was deafening. With his heart racing, Dave sped to the nearest gas station, almost without thinking, as if fleeing from reality itself. When he abruptly parked, his trembling legs barely supported him. The desert was quiet again, but something in his skin and mind told him that this silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was something deeper, more unsettling. He looked at the passenger seat and for the first time noticed a small metallic object on it. It was a shiny sphere, tiny, but with a palpable energy that seemed to vibrate with its own force. Curiosity took over Dave, and he reached out to touch the object. But as soon as his fingers made contact with the sphere, an electric shock coursed through his body, freezing his bones and leaving him dizzy. A wave of nausea overwhelmed his mind, and he passed out. When he woke up, he was back in the truck. There was no logical explanation for his return to that place. The gas station was now miles away. How he had traveled there, he didn't know. His body was still exhausted, as if something had drained all his energy. The radio was on, but the only sound coming from it was a constant buzz, a frequency that didn't seem human, as if something was trying to communicate with him but in a code he couldn't understand. Desperate, Dave tried to share his experience, perhaps hoping to find someone who could give him an explanation. But when he tried to post his story online, his account was mysteriously deleted. No warning, no explanation. It just disappeared. Dave tried again, but his story never went through. He felt the presence of something watching him, monitoring him. Something was happening, something he couldn't comprehend but knew he would never forget. The buzz from the radio echoed in his mind, as if it were the only thing left. A constant reminder that he was being manipulated, perhaps even silenced. Whatever that man was, and whatever had happened there, it was now a part of him, and he couldn't shake it off. Dave's life was never the same after that night. The metallic sphere he found in the truck remained hidden in his glove compartment, a constant reminder of the inexplicable encounter. He tried to convince himself it was just a strange dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion or the oppressive heat of the desert. But deep down, he knew better. The sphere was real. The man, or whatever it was real. And the buzzing in his mind, the faint static that seemed to follow him everywhere, was a constant reminder that he was no longer alone. Days turned into weeks, and Dave tried to return to his normal routine. He continued his trucking routes, avoiding the stretch of road near Area 51 at all costs. But the desert has a way of pulling people back in, especially those who've brushed against its secrets. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep, bruised purple, Dave found himself on a detour that led him uncomfortably close to the forbidden zone. The radio crackled with static, and the buzzing in his head grew louder, more insistent. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, and tried to focus on the road ahead. But the desert had other plans. As he drove, the headlights of his truck illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road. Dave's heart skipped a beat. It was the same man, or at least it looked like him, the same hollow eyes, the same unnerving stillness. Dave slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt. The truck skidded to a halt just a few feet from the figure. Dave's breath came in ragged gasps as he stared at the man, who tilted his head slowly, just as he had done before. "I need to go back," the man said, his voice a monotone echo. Dave's mind raced. He wanted to drive away, to leave this nightmare behind, but something held him in place. The buzzing in his head grew deafening, and the metallic sphere in the glove compartment began to hum, vibrating with an otherworldly energy. Against his better judgment, Dave reached for the sphere. As soon as his fingers touched it, the world around him dissolved into a blur of light and sound. When his vision cleared, Dave was no longer in his truck. He stood in a vast, cavernous space illuminated by an eerie blue light. The walls were smooth and metallic, covered in strange symbols that pulsed faintly, as if alive. The air was thick and heavy, and the buzzing in his head had transformed into a low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Before him stood the man from the road, but now he looked different. His form flickered and shifted, as if he were made of static, and his eyes glowed with the same blue light that filled the room. Behind him, Dave could see other figures, shadows that moved and twisted in the periphery of his vision, always just out of reach. "You shouldn't have looked," the man said, his voice echoing as if coming from all directions at once. "Now you're part of it." Dave tried to speak, but no words came out. His body felt heavy, as if the air itself were pressing down on him. The man stepped closer, his form solidifying for a moment, and Dave saw something in his eyes, a flicker of something human, something desperate. "Help me," the man whispered, his voice breaking. "I need to go back." Before Dave could respond, the room began to shift. The walls closed in, the symbols glowing brighter, and the hum grew to a deafening roar. Dave felt himself being pulled, as if the very fabric of reality were unraveling around him. He closed his eyes, bracing for the end, but when he opened them again, he was back in his truck, parked on the side of the road. The sphere was gone. Dave sat there for what felt like hours, his mind reeling. The buzzing in his head had stopped, replaced by a profound silence that felt almost worse. He didn't know what had just happened, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't go back to his old life. The desert had claimed him, just as it had claimed the man from the road. In the weeks that followed, Dave began to notice changes. He would catch glimpses of the man in the corner of his eye, always just out of reach. The static on the radio would sometimes coalesce into faint, distorted voices, whispering words he couldn't quite understand. And at night, he would dream of the cavernous room, the glowing symbols, and the flickering figures that moved in the shadows. One night, as he lay in bed, the buzzing returned, louder than ever. Dave sat up, his heart pounding, and saw the metallic sphere on his nightstand. It pulsed with a faint blue light, and as he reached for it, the room around him dissolved once more. This time he didn't fight it. When Dave woke up, he was no longer in his home. He stood in the cavernous room, the man from the road by his side. The other figures were closer now, their forms more defined. They moved with purpose, their glowing eyes fixed on Dave. "Welcome back," the man said, his voice no longer a monotone, but filled with a strange, almost sad relief. "You're home now." Dave looked around, the weight of the truth settling over him. He wasn't sure what had happened to him or what he had become, but he knew one thing: the desert had taken him, just as it had taken so many others. And now he was part of something far greater and far more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. The buzzing in his head was gone, replaced by a new sound, the hum of the cavern, the pulse of the symbols, and the whispers of the figures around him. They were waiting for him, waiting to show him the truth. And Dave, for the first time in his life, was ready to listen. Dave was never seen again. His truck was found abandoned on the side of the road, near the restricted area of Area 51. The cab was empty, except for a small metallic sphere left on the passenger seat. When authorities retrieved it, it emitted an intense blue glow and then disintegrated into dust, leaving no trace. No sign of Dave was ever found, but in the weeks that followed, drivers passing through the same stretch of road reported seeing a lone figure in the distance, standing in the middle of the desert, staring fixedly at the road. Some swore the figure looked like Dave, while others insisted it was the man with the hollow eyes. The radios of trucks passing through the area sometimes picked up a strange transmission, a distant, monotone voice whispering, "I need to go back." And so, the desert continued to guard its secrets, while the lonely road remained silent, as if nothing had happened. But on the darkest nights, when the wind blew softly over the sand, it was possible to feel a presence, as if something or someone was always there, watching, waiting, and the darkness of the desert seemed to whisper, almost imperceptibly, "He's still here." In the early 2000s, Jason was an ordinary IT technician, a dedicated and meticulous professional who worked tirelessly at a secret military installation in a remote desert region of the United States. The base, far from any civilization and hidden from the bustling city streets, seemed like a fortress of steel and concrete, surrounded by vast expanses of arid, lifeless terrain. The austere environment reflected the nature of the place, a location where the outside world seemed irrelevant, and everything revolved around absolute secrecy and impenetrable security. Jason, with his technical skills and attention to detail, was one of the few allowed to access the base's highly protected networks and servers. His daily routine consisted of fixing glitches, updating systems, and ensuring that the computers and servers ran without a hitch. Although the work was repetitive and often monotonous, there was something about the atmosphere of the base that always bothered him. There was a persistent feeling that nothing in that place was what it seemed, that the shadows around it hid something that should never be revealed. Something loomed over him, a premonition that the truth was far beyond what he could imagine. The installation, far from being just a military center, was shrouded in deep mysteries. Among the few older employees, rumors and stories circulated about the most secret and inaccessible areas of the base. The most intriguing and discussed of these was the enigmatic Hangar 18. Those who dared to speak of it described it as a highly restricted underground facility where, according to rumors, the U.S. government stored extraterrestrial technology. They spoke of flying saucers, alien artifacts that defied scientific logic, and even creatures from other worlds, captured during mysterious events or military investigations. But what sent the most chills down their spines was the way people spoke of Hangar 18, not as if it were just a legend, but as something real, with an aura of immense terror and fascination. Jason, with his skeptical and rational mindset, never fully believed these stories. However, curiosity, something that always drove him, consumed him. What was really happening at that base? One night, during a routine maintenance check on a backup server, a seemingly simple task that had never presented anything out of the ordinary, something unexpected happened. While navigating the system's internal directories, Jason found an encrypted file, a video that clearly shouldn't have been there. Located in a secret directory within a system protected by multiple layers of security, the file was in a network area he knew was off-limits. The combination of curiosity and the chance to finally uncover some mystery drove him to investigate. Using his credentials, he began the decryption process, hesitating for a moment, but the need to understand what was being hidden was stronger, and with a simple click, the video revealed itself. What appeared on the screen was something Jason could never have anticipated. The video showed a small, desolate room with bare concrete walls, devoid of any decoration or furniture except for a metal chair in the center. The lighting was dim, almost non-existent, giving the room an even more oppressive feel. In the dark, sterile environment, something moved, or rather, someone. Jason, who had dealt with various types of files and recordings in his career, realized this wasn't an ordinary recording. The figure on the screen appeared humanoid, but in a way that defied any logical understanding. Its skin was grayish and almost translucent, with a metallic tone, and its eyes, large, black, and empty, were devoid of any emotion or intent. They didn't seem to connect with the world around them, as if the creature were in a state of total indifference, oblivious to everything and everyone. The creature was seated in the metal chair, its arms hanging limply at its sides, with no movement except for its lips, which moved slowly, as if trying to articulate words but without any sound. The silence in the room was profound, almost palpable, as if the air itself were dense and heavy, making it hard for Jason to breathe as he watched, completely paralyzed by the gravity of the scene. Strangely, he felt that the creature knew it was being watched. It was as if it knew someone was on the other side of the screen, observing. Then, abruptly and unexpectedly, the being turned its head and looked directly at the camera. Its eyes pierced the lens with an intensity that sent a chill down Jason's spine. It wasn't just an empty gaze, but a conscious, deep gaze, as if the creature were aware of his presence, analyzing him. The sensation that what was being shown wasn't a recording from the past, but a situation happening in real time was overwhelming. Jason, with trembling hands, immediately closed the file, erasing all access logs from the system. Adrenaline surged through his body and he felt a primal fear. Something was terribly wrong, and he was somehow involved. The next day, something strange happened. Jason was called to the base's security office, a place usually reserved for serious matters. There, he found two men in suits, their expressions impassive, as if they had no interest in his previous work. They were cold, with emotionless faces, as if they were waiting for something but offered no explanation. They told Jason he needed to come with them but didn't specify why. Despite a gut feeling that something was wrong, Jason had no choice and followed them through the base's corridors. But the further he walked, the heavier the weight on his shoulders became, as if the ground were opening beneath his feet. The air was thick and charged with tension. Something was about to happen, but he couldn't understand what. Jason was never seen again. His colleagues, who searched for him for days, found no clues about his whereabouts. Records of his presence at the base had disappeared. There were no explanations, no answers. He simply vanished, as if erased from the base's history. The investigations were soon discontinued with no results. Years later, a former colleague of Jason, now in an administrative position, received an anonymous email. The message, without a subject or greeting, was simple but carried a sinister weight. "He's still here." The phrase raised more questions than answers. Was he Jason? Or was it the creature from the video which seemed so aware of its presence? Or perhaps something even more sinister that the base was trying to hide? The former colleague, now obsessed, tried to trace the email's origin but without success. The sender was unknown and the trail soon vanished. Eager to understand more, he began to investigate. However, his search quickly took a dangerous turn. Strangers began following him and vital documents started disappearing. He felt a growing, threatening presence around him, as if he were being watched. Fear became constant, and, without warning, he too disappeared, just like Jason before him. The mystery surrounding the lost video of Hangar 18 was never fully resolved. Many believe the base still holds deep secrets, darker than anyone could imagine. What happened to Jason? Was the creature from the video somehow involved in his disappearance? And what else is being hidden there? The enigmatic message, "He's still here," echoes in the minds of all who have heard of the case. What else lurks in the shadows of the base? Something greater and more dangerous than anyone could imagine. The fear that something is still here, waiting to be revealed, persists like a silent shadow biding its time to manifest. The story of Jason and the mysterious Hangar 18 had become a whispered legend among those who still worked at the base, a cautionary tale for anyone who dared to dig too deep into the secrets of the installation. But the truth, as it often does, refused to stay buried. Years after Jason's disappearance, strange occurrences began to ripple through the base, as if the shadows themselves had awakened. One evening, a new IT technician named Claire, a sharp and ambitious woman in her late 20s, was assigned to oversee the maintenance of the base's central server system. Claire had heard the rumors about Jason and Hangar 18, but like him, she dismissed them as the kind of ghost stories that inevitably sprouted in places steeped in secrecy. However, her skepticism was about to be tested. While performing a routine system audit, Claire stumbled upon a series of encrypted files buried deep within the server's archives. The files were labeled with cryptic codes, but one stood out: H18_VID_001. Her curiosity piqued. Claire began the decryption process, her fingers flying across the keyboard. As the file opened, her screen flickered, and the same eerie video Jason had seen years before began to play. The room was the same, cold, sterile, and oppressive. The creature, with its translucent gray skin and hollow black eyes, sat motionless in the metal chair. But this time something was different. The creature's lips moved more deliberately, and faint, distorted audio began to seep through the speakers. Claire leaned closer, her heart pounding as she strained to hear the words. "Find me," the creature whispered, its voice a guttural rasp that sent shivers down her spine. "He is still here." Claire froze. The creature's head turned slowly, its eyes locking onto the camera with an intensity that felt almost physical. She slammed her laptop shut, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The words echoed in her mind. "He's still here." Was it referring to Jason or something else entirely? Determined to uncover the truth, Claire began to dig deeper. She accessed classified logs, cross-referenced personnel files, and even managed to bypass security protocols to explore restricted areas of the base's network. What she discovered was a labyrinth of secrets: files detailing experiments on extraterrestrial technology, reports of unexplained phenomena, and cryptic references to something called Project Lazarus. One document stood out: a classified memo from the base's director, dated just days after Jason's disappearance. It mentioned an incident in Hangar 18 and the need for containment protocols. The memo was heavily redacted, but one phrase was clear: the subject remains active. Claire's investigation did not go unnoticed. Strange things began to happen. Her computer would glitch at random, displaying distorted images of the creature's face. She heard whispers in empty corridors, faint and unintelligible, but unmistakably real. Security cameras would malfunction whenever she passed by, and she often felt the sensation of being watched, even when she was alone. One night, as Claire worked late in the server room, the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. The hum of the servers faded, leaving an oppressive silence. Then, a single monitor flickered to life, displaying the creature's face. Its lips moved, and the same rasping voice filled the room. "You shouldn't have looked," it said. "Now he knows." Before Claire could react, the door to the server room slammed shut. The monitor went dark, and the lights returned, but the door refused to open. She was trapped. Hours passed, and no one came to her aid. When the door finally creaked open the next morning, Claire was gone. Her laptop was left behind, its screen cracked and displaying a single line of text: "He's still here." The base went into lockdown shortly after Claire's disappearance. Personnel were reassigned, and access to Hangar 18 was permanently sealed. Officially, the incident was labeled as a security breach, and all records of Claire's investigation were erased. But whispers persisted among the staff, rumors of strange lights emanating from Hangar 18 at night, and the sound of faint, otherworldly whispers echoing through the halls. Years later, a group of urban explorers stumbled upon an abandoned facility deep in the desert. Among the ruins, they found a set of old servers, still powered by a failing generator. One of the explorers, a tech-savvy enthusiast, managed to access the system and recover a single file, a video labeled H18 Video 1. As the video played, the explorers watched in horrified silence. The creature's face filled the screen, its hollow eyes staring directly at them. Its lips moved, and a distorted voice whispered, "He's still here." The explorers fled the facility, leaving the servers behind, but the video followed them. Days later, each of them began receiving anonymous messages, all containing the same phrase: "He's still here." One by one, they disappeared, their fates never to be known. The facility was eventually demolished, its secrets buried beneath tons of rubble. But the legend of Hangar 18 endures, a chilling reminder that some truths are better left hidden, and somewhere in the shadows, he waits. Whether these stories are real or not, we may never know. But one thing is certain: there are things happening in the Nevada deserts that the government will never admit. Have you ever heard any strange accounts about Area 51? Do you know someone who's experienced something like this? Leave your comment below. And if you want more unsettling stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and turn on notifications. See you in the next video, if you're still around.